Okay, hey guys. Um, we're just gonna start the webinar now. So we're gonna be doing 2D arrays. So we just wanted to get an idea first of how far along you are with this. Is this something you guys have experienced before? Something completely new? So we know how in depth to go.
Okay.
So have you guys seen 2D arrays before?
In my class, yeah.
Okay. What about for you guys, Jamia and Naraz?
Pardon?
Oh, I was just asking Jamia and Naraz if you guys have also gone through 2D arrays before. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, if you guys don't want to talk, you can also type in the chat.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I guess we'll just go briefly over what conceptually a 2D array is. So I'm gonna send the link to this one site that has really great pictures for it. So yeah, just give me 1 second. Google, why you don't like me anymore? Okay, so I'm gonna send it over the chat, and I'm also gonna screen share just in case you guys are having issues. Wait, what? Yeah, with that. So 1 second. Okay. So sharing my screen now. Okay, so basically, 2D arrays are really, really good whenever you guys are encountering a table. So a table, a grid, anything of that way, shape, or form in which you have something organized by rows and something organized by columns. So in this example, they have a checkerboard. So you can easily see that there's rows up top here, and there are columns going down this way. Oh, sorry. Each column is each vertical line, and each row is each horizontal line. This is going to be something really important in terms of how Java organizes these 2D arrays and how you iterate through them. So one thing really important to note about 2D arrays is that how Java writes them is that they're an array of an array. So this picture is a really good representation of that. So you have your reference variable here called nums, and that's going to point to an array. And since we know that arrays are objects, each element of the array is actually going to point to another array. So that's how you get the whole idea of it having rows and columns, because each element of the array itself contains more arrays. This is probably really confusing, so please let me know if I'm not making sense at all or if you guys have any questions. And I can try to explain it a lot better than that. So yeah, does that make sense for the time being?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's really important to keep in mind that each 2D array is not like its own object, is not something considered anything special. It's not like any sort of class that it's on its own. It's not its own data structure. It's an array of arrays, because that determines how we figure out how long it is and how wide it is, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I think without further ado, we can go over to Hannah to talk about the actual syntax.
Okay. Can you mute your
So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. 1 second. Okay. So I'm just going to show you guys on the ebook how to define a 2D array. So you guys can actually go on your ebook and see this example. So let's just start with this integer array called ticket info. And so if you were to declare a regular array, you would just have in ticket info, but since array, we need both the number of rows and the number of columns. And so when you define a 2D array, you're actually going to use 2 of the square brackets versus just 1 when you do a regular array. So here we're just creating the reference to the 2D array. It's like the same thing that we talked about last week with just normal arrays. 2D arrays are an object, and so you have to define a reference and then actually instantiate the object that the reference points to. So here we're defining a reference to a 2D integer array called ticket info. And then in this line, we are setting ticket info equal to a integer 2D array. And so in the first brackets, we are going to say how many rows we want the 2D array to have. And in the second one, we are saying how many columns we want the 2D array to have. So this is something really important to remember, that when you are defining or accessing elements of a 2D array, you always define the rows before the columns. And then here we're just doing the same thing with a string array. So you just say what the type is, and then you have your 2 square brackets to indicate that it's a 2D array. You name it, and then you set it equal to your 2D array object. So then next we are going to initialize some items in the array. So to access an item of your 2D array, first you want to, in these first square brackets, like I said, rows come before columns. So you indicate the row number that you want, and then in the second one, you indicate the column number that you want, and then you can just set that element equal to whatever you want. And just like regular arrays, again, the indexing is going to start at 0, not at 1. So if we run this code, you guys can see that since we're printing out the object, not the actual elements of an array, and so when this prints, it's going to actually give us the address of the arrays, not the elements that are in the array. And so we're going to go over in an example a little bit later how you guys can actually print out all the elements of an array using for loops. But do you guys understand why when I just have the object in the system.out.println, it prints out the address versus the actual elements of the array?
No.
Okay, because let me try to explain it a little bit better. So in the print line, all that we're doing is sending in the reference to the array. We're not actually accessing any elements. So remember, a reference isn't an actual object in Java, it's just pointing to an object. And so when we have this reference, it's going to print out the memory location that it's pointing to. Okay, I think that's it for the syntax of arrays. And then just like with regular arrays, if you want to figure out the length of an array, you would just do ticket info dot length, and that would give you the length of the columns, or I'm sorry, not of the columns, that would give you the number of rows of the array. And if you did so, zero.length, that would give you the number of columns in the array. So that's just something that's a little bit different between 2D arrays and just a one-dimensional array, is if you want to access the number of columns instead of the number of rows, you have to put this little 0 in brackets. So I think that is it for the syntax. Do you guys have any questions about that?
Yes.
Okay.
When you have like the 0, is that for the columns or for the row?
This is for the columns if
Uh,
you have the 0.
so if it was like no 0 and you just said dot length, it would go with the rows, right?
Yes. So for the ticket info array, we're creating it so the rows have a length of 2 and the columns have a length of 3. So this line would print out 2, and this line would be 3. Do you guys see that okay? Because this is the number of rows and this is the number of columns. And the 0, it doesn't mean anything special. It's just to indicate to Java that you want to print out the, or not print out, just you want to identify.
Are you sure?
Oh yeah, no.
Okay, now we
Oh, sorry. I think, do you guys still see me? I think I went offline for a second.
No, I didn't see you.
Wait, when did I stop talking? Or when did it stop recording me?
It was when you
maybe
were
like
like
a
in the
second.
middle of
Yeah.
explaining the columns and the rows.
Okay, I'll just go over that again really fast then. Sorry about that, guys. So, okay. So if I just type in ticketinfo.length, this is going to give us the number of rows. So for the ticket info array, we can see that the number of rows is 2. So this would be equal to 2. And then if you want to figure out the number of columns, what? Oh, can you guys see my screen?
No, I can't see it.
No.
Okay. I'm sorry about, it says screen sharing failed to start. Okay, let me try rejoining the video call really fast and see if that works.
That's weird. So I guess in the meanwhile, I guess does anybody have any questions or concerns about 2D arrays?
Yeah. Hey, Asa, so how many dimensions can an array go to? Does it only go up to 2 dimensions, or how far can an
Since-
array go?
Ooh, that's a good question. Technically,
So
a 2D array
is it
is that you have one array and each element of that array points to another array. So you could technically go into 3, 4, or 5 dimensions and so on and so forth, where you just have arrays keep on pointing to each other, and it just gets really, really, really messy.
Wow.
But you could technically keep on going, but if you want to represent like a table, since a table has 2 dimensions, rows and columns, that's why you would only want to have a 2D array. Also, Hannah's back, so I'll let her take over.
are ever going to need to have is 2. You don't need to worry about anything else. Okay, do you guys understand what I was saying? I'm sorry, I don't really know when you guys stopped hearing me. Is there anything you want me to go over again?
Can you go over, remember when you said it prints out like just the address but like not the exact characters? That was confusing.
Okay, so this sort of doesn't have to just do with 2D arrays. This just has to do with objects in general, that when I put in a reference to an object into a print line, it's not going to, and so for this example, for an array, it's not going to print the elements of the array. It's actually going to print the address of the object, because ticket info is not the actual array object. It's a reference to an array object. And so the reference is just pointing to this object in memory. And so it's going to print out where that object is stored in memory. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, that's starting to make sense. So it's like whenever you print out a reference, it will always give you an address, not the
Yes.
exact thing, right?
Yeah. So that's just that's important like for Java in general, not just with arrays, that if you ever had an object and you put it in a print line statement, it's going to print the address, not the actual object.
So I have another question. Is these like, are the numbers like random, or is it like an exact spot within the memory of the code?
That's a good question. I am not actually really sure.
It's the actual address.
Because
address.
if it's an address, it's like you could pinpoint where it is. Like it should be like a section or something like that.
Yeah. So I guess that's like a little bit more advanced, like when they get into like hashing and stuff, then they can actually choose kind of where
Wait,
to
what's
store
hashing?
it.
I never learned any of this. So
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know.
You guys, okay, that's not on the AP exam. That's a little bit later. When you guys start getting more advanced in Java, you can actually kind of figure out where you want to store things in memory. But that's like later down the line. You don't have to worry about that right now. But that's just the important thing to remember for now, that a reference is just pointing to where the object is in memory. And so that's why when you put the name of the reference in the print statement, it's going to give you the address, not the actual object. And so we're going to go through a little bit later how you'd actually print out all the elements in this array. So did you guys hear when I was talking about these two statements, or was I offline during that?
Oh, you was talking about those, and then we was like explaining them. You cut off.
Okay.
But you explained most of it.
Okay, I'll just go over it quickly one more time then. It's just very simple. So if it's just like last week how we talked about finding the length of an array. Basically, 2D arrays work the exact same way, except if you want to access the number of rows, then you just do the same thing that you would do for a regular array. You just do ticketinfo.length. But if you wanted to access how many columns were in the array, then you have to add this 0 in brackets, and that is going to give you the columns instead of the rows. So that's basically it. Most of it is just the exact same.
She went off again.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It keeps restarting.
Okay, am I
Okay,
back?
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
Okay,
sorry about that, guys.
guys.
I think that was it though. So unless you guys, do you guys have any questions about syntax of arrays? No questions?
No.
Okay, then I think we're going to get into some examples now.
Oh, should I go over?
Oh, just kidding. Yeah, actually we have one more thing to go through, and then we're gonna go into examples.
Okay, so we're basically going to go over looping now. So let me pull up this picture again. So I'm going to screen share. Is it this one? Yes. So let's pretend that this checkerboard is our 2D array. So we can see that concretely it has a certain number of rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. And we can see that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns. And so because we know the exact number of rows and the exact number of columns, I think we're going to use.
Wait, say that again? I couldn't hear you.
Okay, so do you guys see the picture of the checkerboard? Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So do you guys see the picture of the checkerboard?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so with this checkerboard, let's pretend that it's a 2D array. So we know that this 2D array has a definite amount of rows because we can actually count it. that there's 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, 5, 6, 7, and 8 rows. And we know how many columns it has because we can count it as well. That there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 columns. So with 8 rows and 8 columns, how do you guys think, what type of loop do you think we would use in order to iterate through all of these different elements?
If it's 2, would it be a for loop?
Mhm.
Because it'll be like a fixed number, and we know exactly what we're trying to do.
Exactly,
So-
exactly.
Yeah.
That's why for 2D arrays, I think I've only seen for loops and for each loops, but we're going to be going into that next week. Focusing on for loops though. So perfect. We know exactly how many rows. We know exactly how many columns. And so if we wanted to iterate through this, the best way to do it is with a for loop. So you would do for, let me see if I can pull this up on the Java, the ebook. So yeah, looking here, we can see how they structure their looping through the actual array. So this is a separate example, but it still works for our purposes. So just like Hannah said earlier, you're generally always gonna start looking at rows first and then columns. So you're gonna start at row 1 and then go from column 0, 0 to 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, so on and so forth. That's just the way that Java works for the most part. You can mess around with that and do something crazy like start with column first and then iterate by row, which is really, really ugly. So it's just not fun. So stick to convention in this way. It's easier for everybody to think about. So yeah, so we're gonna start, okay. We're gonna start with row first. So we're gonna set row equal to 0 because just like we mentioned last week, arrays, you always start with 0 because that's how they're counted. And we're gonna go to a.length. So the important thing that Hannah mentioned previously is that when you're doing a.length, that is the length of the entire 2D array. So if you do a.length, it'll only look at the amount of rows that are in the 2D array. Because if we're looking at this picture over here, since an array, a 2D array is an array of an array, it's going to actually look, if you do a.length, it's just going to look at the length of this one here. So it's just going to look at the length of all the rows. Does that make sense before I move on?
So you said a 2D array is like an array within an array, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. A circle within a circle or a square within a circle.
Yep. I'll be sending you guys all these
Wow.
links that I've been using because I found them really helpful. So, and I already have learned this, so I thought it'd be good for you guys to have a visual. But yeah, so that's why it's really important that if you're looking at if you want to iterate through the rows, you want to make sure that you're doing the reference of the array. So in this case, it's nums. In our previous example, it was a.length because that's going to get you the number of rows. So, okay, moving on. So basically, and when we're setting up the for loop, we want to go from 0 to the end. So that's why we would do row plus plus. So notice how it's a nested for loop. And that makes sense because we want to go within each row, we want to iterate through each column. So that kind of lends itself really nicely to a nested for loop because you're doing something inside each row, but you still want to loop through each row. So looking at the columns, we notice that once again, we're starting at 0. We're going to a0.length. One thing important to note is once again, just explaining the reasoning behind why it's a0.length is once again looking at the image. Since an array is an array of arrays, it's actually going to take the length of whatever it's pointing to here. So since a0 is technically the first element, it's going to look at the array it's pointing to and find the length of that. And that is why it's the number of columns. Does that make sense?
So I have a question. The numbers that's in the red blocks, is that like the ID?
The numbers that are in the red blocks are just representing the contents of that array.
Oh, I see.
So it's just showing that in the first row here, it's pointing an array that the first element is 2 and the second is 8 and the third is 1 and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Yeah, so does it make sense about why it is A0 dot length as opposed to A dot length? Because once you get that, you basically got a for loop. You know how to iterate through a 2D array, because that's basically what you do. Because afterwards, you know how to access each element. Because just like with the normal array, you have the name of the array, and then in brackets, you have the location of it. In this case, since it's a 2D array, with 2 dimensions, row and column, we are using row and column in order to identify where it is. Kind of like a coordinate plane, you could think about it that way. Probably the most apt way would be thinking about it like a table with a certain number of rows and a certain number of columns. So does that make sense? Otherwise, we can get started straight into examples.
Wow, this makes sense.
Yay!
I'm looking at it. It looks like just you have your input, your output. Yeah, it looks like you can just graph this stuff. Like, it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, you can definitely draw this all out.
Yeah.
So I guess without further ado, Hannah will do the first example problem.
Okay. I'm going to paste the first problem. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit, guys. I'm going to paste the first problem for you guys into the group chat. Okay, so we're going to start out with an easy one. You guys could just type your answers in the group chat if you want. We just want to write a statement that's going to instantiate a multidimensional array of integers, and we want to call the array nums, and we want it to have 5 rows and 5 columns. So you guys can just type your answer in the chat if you want, or you can write it. I'll just give you guys a couple of minutes, or not a couple minutes, like 1 minute, but. Nope, you just want to write this statement.
Oh, okay. Ah, that's what you mean.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yep, good
I was gonna
job.
write something else. Like I was gonna write like. Wow.
Yep, I just
So-
wanted simple statement to instantiate it. So, so that's correct. So basically, does that make sense to everybody? The answer that's in the group chat?
I understand. It says integer, so that's a data type. So he initiated the variables, and you said it's supposed to be a 2D array. So that's when it's the 2 squares. Then nums, that was another variable, equals new integer 5, 5. The first one will be the rows, while the second will be the columns.
Yes.
So that looks pretty accurate to me, and that looks great.
Yep. Just to clarify something that you said though, so you said that both int and nums was a variable. Just to like clarify a little bit, just to be very correct. So int is the variable type that we want the array to be. We want it to be an array of integers, and then nums is what we want to call it. So nums is like the reference that is pointing to our 2D array of integers. Just to clarify a little bit. Okay.
I have another question.
Yep.
So nums is like the variable that we call it, and then we say equal new int. That would be like the new object type, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Of the assignment boolean or the assignment statement, right? Okay.
Yep. Okay. Now we're going to actually have you guys write some lines of code working with 2D arrays. So for the next problem, I want you guys to just write a couple of statements of code that are going to fill a 2D array with integers increasing from 1 to 25.
So yeah, this time when you're done, don't type your answer into the group chat, just type done. so that it's easier for all of us to discuss it.
And to complete this code, you guys can actually use the integer array that we just instantiated in the last problem. So you can use that nums array and fill that array with the integers from 1 to 25. Okay, do you guys still need more time?
Yes.
Okay. Are you guys stuck or are you getting through it or
I'm stuck.
you're stuck? Okay. Do you guys want me to go over it now? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Hopefully it doesn't go out again. Okay. Let me get it up. Okay, so this is the answer. So we have our integer array nums that we declared in the last exercise I had you guys do. And so then we're going to go down here and we're going to declare an integer called value to be 1. And then we want to loop through all the elements that are in our nums array, our nums2D array. So we're going to use the technique that Asta was talking about earlier, where we're going to go through 2 for loops, one looping through the rows of the array and one looping through the columns. So this first loop is going through all the rows, and so we're going to have an integer I that's equal to 0. So the array is going, sorry, not the array. So I is going to start at 0, and it's going to run as long as it is less than the number of rows that are in nums, and we are going to increment I by 1 each time. And then every time that we go through a row, we want to go through all of the columns. And so then we're going to have this inner for loop, and we're going to have another integer j that starts at 0, and j is going to be incremented by 1 for as long as it is less than the number of columns that are in nums. So does that make sense so far?
Yes.
Okay, so this is allowing us to access every single element of the array. And so we are going to take our nums array and for every single value, so it's going to go through all of the rows with I and then all of the columns with j. And then we're going to input whatever value is. So it starts off at 1. And then value is going to be incremented by 1 each time. And since we declared nums to have 5 rows and 5 columns, that means that it is filled with 25 elements. And so value is going to keep increasing until we get to 25, because these 2 loops together, they're going to go through 25 times. And that is going to fill our nums array. So does that make sense to everyone?
Yep.
Yes? No one has any questions? Okay. So now Asta is going to go through 1 or 2 harder examples for you guys.
Okay, so let me find it. Are you guys good or stuck, or just give me the lay of the land, I suppose.
I'm stuck.
Okay, we got one person stuck. How about you guys, Naraz, Steven?
Their mics are on mute.
Almost got it.
Almost got it. What about you, Steven? Okay, so I guess let's give it like one more minute, and then I'll run through it with you guys. Okay, so I'm just gonna go over like my thought process in approaching this problem. So I'm going to share my screen. So we have to create a method, right, called numbers larger than 15 that's going to take in a 2D array. We don't know what size. And we know it's going to return some sort of integer that's going to be the number of values in that array that are greater than 15. So that's how you format the method header. So if we're going to count how many numbers are larger than 15, it would make sense to actually have a counter variable. So I'm just setting int counter equal to 0. So, okay, cool. Now we want to iterate through the array itself. So following the same format that we've done before, we're going to have int row is equal to 0, starting off at 0 as always. We are going to run through the all the rows in this 2D array. So that's going to be nums.length. And we're going to increment by 1 because we want to start from row 0 and then keep on going to row 1, 2, so on and so forth. And then same thing for columns. We're going to start with int col is equal to 0. We're going to increment for all the columns, which we know to be nums0 dot length. And we're going to increment so we hit them all. Does that make sense for everybody?
For the counter variable, it's not like just for the when you increment, or it's for something else.
This counter variable up here?
Yep.
Okay, so that's basically just going to be every time we hit a number that's greater than 15, we're going to increment it. So it's just basically going to count all the values in the array that are greater than 15.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions, Naraz, Steven? Want to make sure like everybody's on the same page here before I get going. Have I said anything? Typed anything? Okay.
Steven says he understands.
Okay, yay! So the rest of this part is actually pretty simplistic. So we want to look at the value at a certain point. So we want to look at nums row column. Get in there. Okay, column. And we want to see that if it's greater than 15, we want to increment counter by 1. So since we're using if, like when I'm verbalizing it, it lends itself to an if statement really well. So if nums row column, so the value at that particular location is greater than 15, we're going to increment counter by 1. And so that means by the time we exit this entire nested for loop, we should have all the values that, all the number of values that are greater than 15. And one tip that my AP Comp Sci teacher said that apparently a lot of people in the exam forget to do is actually write the return statement at the end. So because you get so wrapped up in writing your code and making sure everything works that you forget that your code won't even run unless you're returning something. So just a hint for the wise, something that I used to do was I'd always write a counter, or I'd write the variable and then I'd always return it. And then afterwards I would write my code in between, just so I made sure I always had something being returned at the end. But yeah, so does that make sense to everybody? Like my thought process, how I went across about doing this problem?
Yeah.
You guys too, Naraz and Steven?
Hey, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So when you write problems like these, you have like a nested for loop, and then you have an if statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I see it. So when it says return a value, yeah, you gotta have return for that variable or integer.
Yep, because then it kind of defeats the purpose, because we figured out how many values are greater than 15, but then we do nothing with that information. So, everything good?
Okay, yep, they say it makes sense.
Okay, yay, perfect. We still have a little bit of time. Do we have time to go through another example problem, do you think?
I think we could try to go through another, maybe if you just like went over it instead of having them try first.
Okay, the multiplication
Then we
one.
don't have enough time.
Okay, so here I'm going to send the link of the question. Where is it? Here. Okay, okay. So we're going to look at the multiplication question, which is PC5. So here, basically, what we want to do is we want to create a 2D array that is going to basically print the correct multiplication table. So the first row is going to print all the numbers from like 1 to 9. So basically 1 times 1, 2 times 1, 3 times 1, so on and so forth. And we want to continue that pattern throughout. So the second row is going to print 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, dot, dot, dot. 3, printing 3, 6, 9, 12, dot, dot, dot. Extended for an extended period of time. So how are we going to approach this? So going to handy dandy Eclipse, just going to open up a new file. And okay. So we have some sort of integer. Let's actually make this a method. So public is going to return an array. So it's going to return an array itself called multiplication. Multiply, I can spell. Okay. Yes, and I don't think it's necessarily going to take anything. Oh, we can actually have it taken two integers, int row and int column, which are going to indicate how big we want the array to be. So the first thing we're going to do is actually instantiate this array. So we're going to just call it, I guess, nums for now, or R for array, is equal to new int array. And we want it to be the size of row and column. And so sticking to what I've always done with AP exam problems, I just always had it return the thing. So all the errors go away, and it always ensures that you have a return statement. And that's an easy way to get points, even if you don't know how to actually do the method. If you write that, you'll at least get 1 point. So okay, so now we're going to populate this. So we're going to have the nested for loop of int row is equal to 0, row is less than r dot length, and then row plus plus. And we're going to do the same thing for column. When col is equal to 0, col is less than r0 dot length, col plus plus. Now we want to oh, okay, I see why this is happening. It's basically because I'm having int row equals 0 here, but I'm also having int row as a parameter. So I'm actually going to have to change the value there so that we don't have two variables of the same name. I'm just going to condense it to R and C, so everything still makes sense. Sorry about that, kiddos. Okay, so now we're going to actually fill in the values. So we want it to be that it prints out the multiplication table, which when we think about it is basically the idea of multiplying the row by the column and just having the value of the element equal that. So what we're actually going to end up doing is that it's going to be R row RC, not row column, is equal to R times C. So what this is actually going to achieve is that it's going to take whatever row number we're on and whatever column number we're on, multiply them together and print out the, or rather it's going to save that value. So just for the purposes of testing it, I'm just going to have it print out those values just so we can see if I am correct or not. So RC. And then after each.
Oh, also, so this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, with printing out the actual values of an array versus printing out the reference to the array. So does that make sense now? Do you guys see how Austin's actually printing out the value of what is in the array versus the reference?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so if we hit, now in the main method, we are going to run this. So let's say we're going to go like a 3 by 2. Oh, this should be static. Sorry, I made this method static just because I don't want it to act on an object. I just wanted to simply print out something. So let us see what happens in the console. Hopefully we are correct. Let's make this a bit bigger so we can actually see the values. Okay, cool. So we can see here that we actually have all the multiplication tables here in the console. That the first row being the multiplication row of 0, it's just going to print out zeros. And then it's going to do it the same thing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 3, 6, 9, 12, and so on and so forth. So we will be like emailing or messaging out all the code for these examples and the links that we've been using probably on Saturday after we're done. So yeah, anybody have any last minute questions?
Remember the loop that we did yesterday?
The nested while loop?
Yeah, I got stuck again while tracing, but it's like I get it, but I keep getting stuck. Hey.
Okay, that's something we could do more on a one-on-one basis.
Okay.
Just because it doesn't really have to do with 2D arrays, but we can definitely go over that.
Okay. I have another question. On Eclipse, do you use like a lot of debugging?
Yeah.
The debugger is good to learn.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn it because if I can learn a debugger, it can help me with like the tracing and stuff like that, just the mindset. So it just looks very complicated using the debugger. It has so many different options and buttons and stuff I gotta learn, but it's worth it. So
You could just look up a video on YouTube about how to use it, and that could help. Because a lot of people do like see it that it looks really complicated, and so then they don't want to learn how to do it. But once you do know how to do it, it really does help so much. And that is something that it is really good for, like going through and tracing variables. So
Nice.
yeah, the debugger is definitely something that you guys should try to learn how to use because it can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what's funny? I was looking up a video on the debugger before the webinar started, and I didn't get anything that he was saying. It was just he was
Oh.
speaking numbers, and
Well, maybe try to look for another, or maybe ask your computer science
Yeah.
teacher about it.
yeah,
Definitely something good to know.
Mhm.
yeah. If I can learn
Also,
debugger,
just remember that for the AP exam, you're going to be tracing by hand, obviously. So
yeah. But
don't get
just
too reliant on it.
no, I'm not going to rely on it. It's just to learn how to use a debugger. It's just going to help with the tracing, like just
Mhm.
by myself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's still a good skill to know.
yeah, the more and more I'm starting to learn from you guys, it's like I don't really trust the compiler anymore. So it's very weird.
Well, actually, more often than not, the compiler is right and we're wrong. So
yeah.
I think most of the time, actually.
That's great.
So I guess any other questions before we do some last minute like PSAs and then we'll call it a day?
Wait, what's a PSA?
Public service announcement.
Oh, okay.
Oh, was I online when I was talking about hashing? Did they hear
Yeah,
that? Did you guys hear when I was talking about hashing? Okay, because I went over it in my mind again, and I just wanted to clarify something. Hashing, okay, you guys don't need to actually worry about this, but hashing does not change the memory location of something in Java. It's like a way to sort of help you find something easier, but it doesn't actually change where something is located. I just wanted to correct that. But you guys don't actually need to know that, so don't worry about that right now. Yeah.
So I guess we'll just go to like some quick PSAs. So just remember to get your consent forms in. Kate will be sending an email about that, but it's just really important because this is a research project. And so we do need your consent in order to like use your information and so on and so forth. And so you guys get like the full benefits of what we're doing. And then the second thing is that on March 4th, I believe, which is I think 2 Saturdays from now, we're going to be having an in-person session here, most likely in College Park. And so you guys will be getting dinner, I think most likely pizza, and we'll be doing a more in-depth session over different topics. We're going to be doing some AP exam review and getting you guys like more used to doing those sorts of problems. And we're going to have some fun stuff too. So just keep that on your calendar and keep that like marked down. I think we will be providing like a webinar way to access it, but if you guys can come, it's definitely a lot better to do it in person. So with that, I guess we'll just call it a day. So bye guys. Enjoy
Yep.
your President's Day.
See you guys.
See ya.
But wow, to see you guys in person, that's